Murder is scary enough, but what happens when the killers escape? Today we are diving into the real-life nightmares of murderers who broke out of prison. And some didn't stop at just one victim. They went in dangerous and came out deadly. And I'm your host, Alina. Let's get into it. Okay, buckle up because this story is a wild ride through mental institutions, murder, love affairs, and multiple passports. In 1971, Richard Caputo stabbed his girlfriend, Natalie Brown, to death. Horrifying, yes, but that was just the beginning. When he was arrested, the court ruled he wasn't mentally fit to stand trial. So instead of prison, he went to mental institution, where he somehow managed to start dating one of the psychologists. Yes, you heard that right. A woman named Judith Becker fell for the guy who literally murdered his girlfriend. And spoiler, she would become his next victim. Caputo got transferred to a minimum security facility, which honestly sounds like a terrible idea in hindsight, and was even allowed out on furloughs. During one of those little getaways, he strangled Judith and vanished from New York. Fast forward to 1975. He pops up in San Francisco with a new girlfriend, but history repeats itself. Her body was later found beaten and lifeless in her apartment. After that, Mexico. Because why not flee the country when you're already 3 bodies deep? In Mexico City, 1977, Caputo struck again. Victim number 4. And somehow, during this time, he managed to slip in and out of the US, like it was a casual border hop. One time, US officials actually detained him in El Paso, but he escaped. Over the next 2 decades, Caputo played house. Not once, but twice. 2 wives, multiple kids, and all the while, the FBI was hunting him. He even landed a spot on America's Most Wanted. Yes, the 90s show your aunt was obsessed with. Then, in 1994, out of nowhere, he turns himself in, claimed the guilt was eating him alive. He confessed to 4 murders, and the police suspect at least 2 more. His defense team said he had multiple personalities. The judge said, "Cool story, still guilty," and sentenced him to 8.5 to 25 years. But get this, Caputo only served 2 years before dying in prison in 1997. Karma? Maybe. Closure? Not really. And that's the story of Richard Caputo. A killer with more escape acts and love interests than a telenovela. Let me know in the comments, should we blame the system or the women who fell for him? Alright, this one is straight out of a true crime horror story, and not the kind you forget easily. In 1991, Donald Evans was arrested for something beyond horrifying. The rape and murder of a 10-year-old homeless girl he kidnapped from a park in Mississippi. A literal monster. But once police had him in custody, that's when things got even darker. Evans started bragging, yes, actually bragging, about having killed more than 70 people across the US. He claimed to be a cross-country serial killer, a real-life boogeyman drifting from state to state, leaving bodies behind. Now, that kind of confession set off a national panic and a lot of paperwork. Multiple task forces were formed to investigate his claims and tried to connect him to cold cases. Spoiler alert, he wasn't quite the prolific killer he wanted people to think he was. Investigators could only confirm 3 murders. The 10-year-old girl and 2 as workers in Florida in 1985. Not that 3 murders is in any way minor, but it's a far cry from the 70 he bragged about. The general consensus? He exaggerated, probably to inflate his ego and cement himself in a twisted serial killer hall of fame. Sorry, Don, not quite Ted Bundy level. But hold on, the plot thickens. On June 13, 1993, while awaiting trial in Mississippi's Harrison County Jail, Evans and 3 other inmates pulled off a prison break that could have been a Netflix original. They overpowered a guard using a homemade shank, took him hostage and escaped. Cue the manhunt. Authorities brought out the dogs, set up roadblocks, and panicked over the idea that Evans might disappear into nearby New Orleans, a city full of tourists, noise, and places to hide. But turns out Evans wasn't exactly a criminal mastermind. Less than 24 hours later, they found him hiding in a shed in a lumber yard, just half a mile from the prison. Not exactly catch me if you can material. Shortly after being recaptured, Evans pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to death. And here's where karma catches up. In 1999, while being escorted back from the showers, Evans was stabbed to death by another death row inmate. Authorities didn't even have time to carry out his execution. The prison yard took care of that for them. So we've got a self-proclaimed super killer, a not-so-great escape, and a brutal prison yard ending. Donald Evans wanted infamy. And in a twisted way, he got it. But not because he was clever or cunning, just because he was cruel. Let me know what you think. Was Evans really a wannabe Bundy? Or is there a chance he was telling the truth about the other victims? Either way, his story is one of the darkest and dumbest in a true crime archives. So picture this, it's the day after Christmas, 1975, while most people were sleeping off a food coma and arguing over who drank the last eggnog. Rodney Halbower was walking out of jail on bail. Why was he there? Oh, just awaiting trial for raping a blackjack dealer in Nevada. Tis the season, right? Now, here's where things get truly chilling. Over the next 5 months, while out on bail, Halbower went on a full-blown killing spree, raping and murdering at least 6 women, 5 in the San Francisco Bay Area and 1 in Reno, Nevada. The man was literally out on bail and using it like a murder tour pass. Then, as if nothing had happened, he went back to Nevada, stood trial for the original rape, and got slapped with a life sentence. But since he committed the murders in a different state, no one put the pieces together, and the 5 Bay Area victims became part of what the press would call the Gypsy Hill murders. Meanwhile, in Reno, the 6th murder got pinned on a mentally ill woman, who, by the way, was institutionalized for the crime she didn't commit. And while evidence started to suggest she was innocent, the real killer was just sitting in prison, quietly getting away with everything. But wait, Halbower wasn't exactly contained. He escaped not once, but twice. The first time, June 1977, during a softball game. Yes, you heard that right, a prison softball game. He ran for it and somehow made it all the way to Michigan, where he kidnapped his own daughter. Family reunion from hell. Then in 1986, he teamed up with another ex-offender, and the two of them climbed a wall, cut through 2 fences, and ran right under a guard tower. It's like the guards were on lunch break or something. A few days later, Halbower shows up in Medford, Oregon, where he stabbed a 23-year-old woman 19 times in an attempt to steal her purse. Miraculously, she survived. That attack got him convicted of attempted murder in Oregon, and back to prison he went, this time in Carson City. Fast forward to 2013. Halbower is paroled for the original rape charge, because apparently that sentence had an expiration date, and is sent to Oregon to serve time for the stabbing. Here's where karma finally steps in. In Oregon, they took his DNA. That sample lit up cold cases like a Christmas tree. His DNA matched the unsolved Gypsy Hill murders and the murder in Reno, the one wrongly blamed on the mentally ill woman. And here's the ultimate twist. If he hadn't escaped, attacked that woman and ended up in Oregon, his DNA might have never been taken. His own crime spree accidentally connected him to his past. So in early 2015, Rodney Halbower was finally charged with 2 of the 6 murders. Let's be real, it should have been all 6, but at least justice finally caught up with him. Eventually. Anyway, can we all agree that softball day at prison might not be the best idea? Alright, let's talk about one of Italy's most chaotic serial killers, Bartolomeo Gagliano, a man whose life reads like a mix between a mafia thriller and a psychiatric horror film. His violent saga started back in 1981, where he bludgeoned a 29-year-old S-worker to death with a rock. Brutal, no question. He was arrested and committed to a psychiatric institution because, of course, the Italian justice system figured he just needed a long time out. Then, in 1983, Gagliano said, "Nah, I'm good," and escaped. But not quietly. He took a whole family hostage before finally getting recaptured after a shootout with police. At this point, any normal person would be locked down for life. But Bart, oh no. His story was just getting started. Fast forward to 1989. Gagliano escaped again, this time with a partner in Crazy from Asylum. And what followed was a full-blown killing spree. First, they murdered 2 people. Then, in February, they shot the trans woman in the mouth. Yes, the level of violence is shocking and cruel. Next, Valentine's Day. And instead of chocolates and flowers, Gagliano shot a transvestite and drug user. A few days later, he gunned down a ass worker, shooting her in the face and neck. But somehow she survived. Absolute miracle. The 2 was finally captured and Gagliano once again was sent to a psychiatric institution. This time he actually served time. And when he got out, you'd think that's where the story ends, right? Wrong. In 2010, he landed in prison again. This time for extortion. The wild part? Prison officials didn't realize he was a convicted serial killer. They thought he was just some low-level crook, like he accidentally got put in a bad but not scary pile. Now here's where it turns into a bad Italian crime movie. In 2013, he convinces the prison that he's a model inmate and gets a day pass to visit his sick mother. But instead of heading to the hospital, he hijacks a car, kidnaps the driver, and disappears. Italy goes on high alert. Borders are checked. Panic sets in. 3 days later, he's caught in France near the border. Honestly, I'm surprised there wasn't a Vespa involved. He was sentenced to an extra 6 years and 10 months for his grand little road trip. And then in 2015, Bartolomeo Gagliano's story came to a final quiet end. He hanged himself with his bedsheet in his prison cell. No shootout this time, just silence. So let's recap. Multiple escapes, 5 confirmed murders, multiple hostage situations, a prison system that somehow forgot he was a serial killer, and a final act of self-destruction. It's a story so wild it almost feels made up, but it's terrifyingly real. So what do you think? Was this a massive failure of the system? Or was Gagliano just too manipulative for his own good? Either way, this guy wasn't just dangerous. He was a walking, talking security loophole. Small, peaceful Canadian town suddenly gripped by fear. Not from a ghost story, but from a real-life monster sneaking through your neighborhoods. That's exactly what happened in the late 80s thanks to Allan Legere, a man so brutal he earned the nickname the Monster of Miramichi. Let's rewind to 1979. Legere was already making trouble in New Brunswick, Canada, getting locked up for violent bar attacks in the Miramichi area. Nothing too headline-worthy yet. But then he escapes prison. Canada. What was going on with your locks in the 70s? He was eventually recaptured in another province, brought back and served his sentence. Fast forward to 1986. Legere is 38, but instead of mellowing out with age, he ups the ante. Big time. He and two teenage accomplices break into the home of John and Mary Glendinning, an elderly couple just trying to live their lives. The trio went looking for a safe. What they left behind was a pure horror. John was beaten to death, and Mary was essayed and severely beaten. All three men were caught and convicted. Legere was handed a life sentence. You'd think that would be the end of the story, right? Nope. In May 1989, during a routine transfer for a medical appointment, because compassionate prison logistics, Legere managed to escape custody again. That's 2 prison breaks now, if you're keeping count. And this time, he didn't just vanish, he hunted. Legere hid out in the communities along the Miramichi River, sneaking in and out of town like some twisted version of Bigfoot. Except Bigfoot doesn't commit murder. 25 days after escaping, he struck. 75-year-old Annie Flem was found tortured and murdered. The town was stunned, and things only got worse. 5 months later, Legere brutally murdered 2 sisters, Donna and Linda, aged just 45 and 41. He didn't stop there. Just 5 weeks after that, he murdered Father James Smith, a 69-year-old Catholic priest. And get this, every single victim had been tortured for hours before being killed. This wasn't just murder, it was sadistic. People in Miramichi were locking their doors, boarding up windows, sleeping with weapons by their beds. Canada doesn't have a reputation for serial killers, but Allan Legere was rewriting the script. Finally, in November 1989, 9 days after killing the priest, Legere was captured after 201 days on the run. He was tried, convicted of all 4 murders and sentenced again. Now, here's the kicker. Despite being one of Canada's most notorious serial killers, Legere is currently serving his time in a minimum security prison in Edmonton. Yes, minimum. Because apparently Munster doesn't come with an extra security upgrade in Canada. So what do you think? Did the justice system fumble this one? Or is Legere exactly where he belongs? Either way, his 6 months rampage left a scar that New Brunswick hasn't forgotten and probably never will. Alright, true crime fam, let's talk about one of America's creepiest early serial killers. A man so slippery, he made Houdini look lazy, and so twisted they called him the Gorilla Killer. Yeah, buckle in, this one's brutal. Earle Nelson was born on May 12, 1897 in San Francisco. On paper, just a kid in a strict religious home. When he was 10, he suffered a head injury. So bad, he was unconscious for 6 straight days. And just like that, his personality flipped like a horror movie switch. Spoiler, head trauma and serial killers go together like peanut butter and murder. In 1918, he was already dangerous. Arrested for attempting to molest a young girl and sent to a mental institution. But here's where it starts to get unbelievable. He kept escaping. And instead of beefing up security, the hospital basically said, oh, forget it, and just discharged him. Like, let's not stress, he's probably fine. But he was not fine. He got married after one escape. Because yes, apparently women were really out here, marrying random drifters in the 1920s. And then threatened his wife so badly he was committed again. And, surprise, he escaped again. That was May 1925. And nobody went after him. Big mistake. Because what followed was a 2-year murder spree across the US that left at least 26 women dead. Nelson had a sick pattern. He posed as a quiet, polite renter looking for a room. Once inside, he strangled the landladies and then performed necrophilia. Yes, we're officially in full nightmare mode. He robbed them afterwards, pawned their things, and used the cash to hitchhike to the next city, like some depraved version of Airbnb with murder. His trail of terror includes Stockton, Portland, Seattle, Council Bluffs, Kansas City, Buffalo, Detroit, Chicago. That man was everywhere. After a brutal murder in Chicago, Nelson didn't stop. He headed to Winnipeg, Canada, where he killed yet another landlady and a 14-year-old girl. Just evil, plain and simple. But finally a break. A store owner in tiny Wapoka, Manitoba, spotted him and called it in. Police caught him heading toward the US border. So, end of story, right? Now with Nelson. He was thrown into a tiny cell in a tiny town police station. The one officer on duty stepped out to call for backup. In that time, Nelson found a rusty nail, picked the lock, escaped, and ran for the train station. That's right, with nothing but a rusty nail and bad vibes. This man Houdini'd his way out of custody. But fate, or karma, had a sense of humor. He accidentally boarded a train full of detectives from Winnipeg. Like literally the worst train to hop when you're on a run. They recognized him instantly, rearrested him, and this time made sure he stayed arrested. He was tried and convicted for one of the Canadian murders, and on January 13, 1928, Earle Nelson, the gorilla killer, was hanged in Winnipeg. And let me tell you, if you thought that Bundy was creepy, Nelson was basically the 1920s prototype. Charming, manipulative, deeply disturbed, and always 2 steps ahead. Until he wasn't. So here's the question. Did the system fail? Or was this guy just pure evil from the jump? Drop your thoughts in the comments and maybe keep your doors locked. Let me introduce you to Lyda Trueblood, Idaho's very own Black Widow, possibly the deadliest housewife you've never heard of. It all started in 1912, when Lyda got married and moved with her new husband to the picturesque town of Twin Falls, Idaho. Things looked wholesome. They even had a baby girl named Lorraine. But behind the curtains, absolute death parade. First to go was Lydia's brother-in-law. He got mysteriously sick and died while living under their roof. Tragic, right? But then her daughter, Lorraine, also suddenly got ill and passed away in 1915. And as if that wasn't enough heartbreak, Lydia's husband died shortly after. Now, if you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of bad luck for one woman, just wait, she's only getting started. 2 years later, in 1917, Lyda remarried, and guess what? The husband also got sick and died shortly after their first anniversary. In 1919, she tried again, and in 1920, another marriage. Both grooms were 6 feet under within months of saying I do. At this point, you'd think someone would raise an eyebrow, and finally, they did. The police tested her 4th husband's blood and exhumed her previous husband's, child, and brother-in-law. Surprise, surprise, all of them had traces of arsenic in their bodies. And that's where the penny dropped. It wasn't grief, it was murder. But Lyda, she was already gone. She'd escaped to California and, wait for it, had already married again and was sweet-talking hubby number 5 into buying a life insurance policy. This woman had no chill. She was caught, tried, and sentenced to life in prison. But Lyda, ever the resourceful murderer, started playing the long game. For about 10 years, she kept a low profile, caused no trouble, and the prison staff relaxed their guard. Big mistake. One night, she MacGyvered a bedsheet robe, knocked a bar loose from her cell window, climbed out like she was in a prison break movie, and scaled the wall. And waiting for her on the other side, her boyfriend, David Minton, who had recently been paroled. Love is patient, love is kind. Love, apparently, helps you escape prison. But Lyda wasn't one for loyalty. She ditched David and married husband number 6 while still on the run. And yes, she immediately started pushing him to get life insurance. Classic Lyda. Authorities caught up with her 15 months later. The 6th marriage was annulled and back to prison she went. Eventually, in 1941, she was released into her sister's custody. And because Lyda couldn't resist, she married again. But the man's kids were like No ma'am, and wouldn't let her anywhere near their father. Probably saved his life, honestly. Lyda Trueblood died in Utah in 1958 after a life that was basically a true crime soap opera. One husband after another, poison in a pantry, and escape plans worthy of a Hollywood script. So, moral of the story? If your spouse starts pushing a life insurance policy out of nowhere, maybe double check their browser history. Alright, this one's got everything. Murder, prison breaks, and a man so dangerous, they literally called him Psycho Shankar. This is one of India's most terrifying serial killer stories. And yes, it's the stuff of actual nightmares. It all started on August 23, 2009, when a female police constable Jayamani vanished while on duty in the Kanjiyam district of Tamil Nadu. This was no ordinary missing person case. She was a cop. When her body was discovered almost a month later, brutally murdered, the search for her killer turned into a full-blown manhunt. That man was Jaishankar, a truck driver by profession, and a monster by every other definition. Once in custody, police realized they weren't dealing with just one murder. Jaishankar was linked to 13 other grave murders and 6 more graves across Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. We're talking about a man who targeted women in isolated areas, especially as workers and police women, often dragging them into fields and killing them with terrifying violence. And here's where it goes off the rails. On March 18, 2011, after a court appearance, Jaishankar was being transported by police when he escaped at a bus depot. He just ran off in Salem like it was a movie scene gone wrong. The aftermath was so shocking. One of the police guards actually unalived himself from the shame of letting him escape. And Jaishankar wasted no time. In the 2 months that followed, he already grieved and murdered 6 more women. Plus, he killed a man and a child. That guy was on a spree. Horrifying and relentless. He was finally recaptured when he tried to assay another woman, but this time she fought back and called for help. But wait, we're still not done. In April 2013, Jaishankar was convicted of 1 rape and sentenced to just 10 years. Yes, just 10 years. He ended up in a high-security prison in Bangalore, but that didn't stop him either. On September 2, 2013, he escaped again. And this time it was straight out of an action movie, but make it low budget and horrifying. Using a duplicate key, no one knows how he got it. He let himself out of his cell, climbed a 20-foot fence, walked across a prison roof like some kind of demented cat burglar, and scaled a 30-foot outer wall using a bedsheet or a belt. Unclear which, but either way, he MacGyvered his way out of prison. He fell during the escape and injured himself, which is honestly the least that could happen. 4 days later, he was recaptured before he could kill again. Thank God. But he left behind chaos, drama, and at least 20 murder charges still pending. To this day, Jaishankar remains one of the most notorious serial killers in India, a man who slipped through the cracks of the system twice and left a trail of destruction wherever he went. This real-life escape turned into a 12-day murder spree straight out of a Tarantino fever dream. Let's talk about Randy Greenawalt, convicted killer, escape artist, and partner in crime to one of the wildest prison gang stories you've probably never heard of. So, it starts back in 1974. Greenawalt gets life for murdering a sleeping trucker. And this is especially chilling. He drew an X on a guy's cab window before firing a bullet through it. That's some Zodiac level creepiness right there. Oh, and he later admitted to killing 2 more men, another trucker in Arkansas and some poor guy in Colorado. So off to Arizona State Prison he goes. While serving time, Greenawalt meets fellow lifer Gary Tison, a man already famous for killing a correction officer during an earlier escape. Lovely. These two become best friends, and by 1978 they are both chilling in minimum security, because logic. Then on July 30, the Tison family reunion gets violent. under the guise of a normal prison visit. Gary Thiesen's 3 sons roll up with a cooler, but surprise, it's packed not with hot sandwiches, but shotguns and handguns. They lock the guards in a closet like a Scooby-Doo villain movie and walk out of prison like it's Casual Friday. From there, things get very bad very fast. The escape crew runs into car trouble. 2 flat tires. So what do? Flag down a young couple driving by. Inside the car, John Lyons, 24-year-old, his wife Donnell, the 23-year-old, their toddler Christopher, and their 15-year-old niece Teresa Tyson. The gang kidnaps the entire family, drives them into the Arizona desert, and executes them. 3 of the bodies were found a week later, the child included. Teresa's remains turned up 5 days after that, and they weren't done. A few days later, stuck in Colorado traffic, the group spots a better ride, a van. Inside, a newly wed couple, James, 26-year-old, and Margene Judge, 23-year-old. The gang forces their way in, kills the couple, and buries the bodies in shallow graves. It would take months before they were found. Finally, on August 11, police set up a roadblock. One of the Thiessen sons tries to ram through it and gets shot in the head. The rest scatter into the desert. Thiessen himself, the ringleader, dies of dehydration out in a brutal Arizona heat. A fitting end, if you ask me. Greenawalt and the 2 surviving Thiessen brothers were arrested. The brothers eventually got their death sentences commuted to life, but Greenawalt not so lucky, or frankly not so undeserving. He was executed on January 23, 1997 for the 6 murders committed during those 12 days of chaos. This whole saga is part prison break, part family cult, and all horror. And the craziest part, these guys weren't criminal masterminds. They just had guns, guts, and zero regard for human life. Okay, so you know how in movies the villain always escapes just when you think they've been caught? Well, that actually happened twice with real-life monster Ted Bundy. And yeah, it was just as terrifying as it sounds. It all kicked off on August 1975 when Bundy was first arrested for kidnapping. The only reason they even caught him was because one incredibly brave woman managed to escape and describe his car, a beige Volkswagen Beetle. Yes, that car. The one now sitting in a museum like it's a haunted artifact. I mean, imagine driving that thing now. No thank you. By 1977, Bundy had already been convicted of that kidnapping and was sentenced to 15 years. But prosecutors knew something darker was going on. They were hot on the trail for his murder charges. So Bundy, who fancied himself smarter than everyone else, was left alone in a court library in Aspen, Colorado. Because apparently 1970s courtroom security was just vibes only. And what does he do? He finds an open window, jumps from the 2nd story, and casually strolls down the main street like he's heading to brunch. He was on the run for 6 days. 6 days. Thankfully, no one was hurt during that escape. But that wouldn't be the case the second time. Because, yes, he escaped again. On New Year's Eve 1977, while the rest of the world was popping champagne, Bundy was losing weight, intentionally, until he dropped 30 pounds. Why? So he could shimmy through a hole he sewed in a ceiling of his cell in Glenwood Springs jail. Apparently, no one noticed he was gone until 15 hours later. 15 hours. By the time they figured it out, Bundy was long gone. He made his way to Florida, and that's where things took a brutal, horrifying turn. On January 14, 1978, just weeks after his second escape, Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. In the middle of the night, he bludgeoned 4 young women in their sleep. 2 of them didn't survive. A third victim, Karen Chandler, suffered a broken jaw, a crushed finger, and deep lacerations. But she survived. It was a savage, frenzied attack, and Bundy wasn't done. Not even even a few hours later, he attacked another woman, Cheryl Thomas, in her nearby apartment, again beating her nearly to death. Her neighbors heard the sounds and called the police, who actually showed up in 4 minutes. But Bundy already gone, like a ghost with a bad attitude and a murder habit. Then, as if things couldn't get any worse, in February, Bundy abducted 12-year-old Kimberly from her middle school in Lake City, Florida. She never made it home. Her body was found 2 months later in a pig pen, a detail so grotesque it still haunts many. Finally, on February 15, 1978, a Pensacola police officer pulled over a suspicious Volkswagen Beetle. Bundy tried to flee. Of course he did. But this time they got him. For real. He was eventually convicted of the murders in Florida and sentenced to death. While Bundy confessed to 30 murders, many experts believe the number is much higher. Some estimates even go as high as 100. He was a manipulative, narcissistic psychopath who knew how to charm people, especially young women, and used that to hide what he truly was, a predator in plain sight. Ted Bundy was finally executed in an electric chair on January 24, 1989, and crowds outside the prison literally cheered. Some even brought signs, buttons, and t-shirts saying things like "Burn Bundy, burn." Thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here. And I'll see you there. Bye!